We live in a world where fiction can sometimes be construed to seem factual. It can reach you via social media or while you're online. The story can come from a reliable source, even from family or friends. How do we distinguish between the two? To explain how to detect fact from fiction, or more commonly known as fake news, is Naledi Mashishi, researcher at Africa Check. Thank you for joining us. Please do share with us how Africa Check began.
Thank you for having me here. So Africa Check was founded in 2012 with the intent of ensuring that the information that is shared in the public domain is accurate. So we are a dedicated organization to fact-checking information. We're the first organization in Africa that was started specifically to fact-check information, and we are a non-profit organization. So we primarily fact-check posts that are posted on social media, but we also fact-check public figures such as politicians and celebrities.
So with regards to the latest fact-check, what did you find as shady?
So we've been seeing a lot of fact-checks related to COVID-19 since last year, and more recently to vaccines specifically. So I'd like to share a fact check that I did last week on the AstraZeneca vaccine, right? So this is a post that I found on Facebook, which claimed that the AstraZeneca vaccine had been banned in Switzerland, right? So the original post has, I expect it's been deleted by now, but here we provide a summary of the post. It was a graphic circulating that already gotten a couple of 100,000 views. It began circulating in early February, and it said that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is of course the same vaccine that 1 million doses of were brought to South Africa last week, has been banned in Switzerland, right? So the graphic said that this was breaking news, and that Switzerland had banned the vaccine for all of its citizens following France, Germany, Sweden, and Poland's decision to advise against the vaccine for people over the age of 65, right? So the important thing, and here you can see a picture of the screenshot as it originally appeared. Now what's important to note about this is that even though it says breaking news here, there is no source provided for the news. We don't know which organization reported this. It just looks like a screenshot, right? So the first thing I did when seeing this was to just Google, Switzerland and AstraZeneca vaccine. And what I found was that Switzerland's company, Swissmedic, which is the country's authority for authorizing medicines, had published a statement where they hadn't banned the vaccine. They had just requested further data from AstraZeneca in order to approve the vaccine. And what I found is that, and so this was the main part of the screenshot that I was fact checking, and this shows that it's just not true. And when I looked further, I found that other European countries, including the countries mentioned in the screenshot, had advised against the vaccine for under 65s. But that's not because of anything bad in the vaccine. It's just because of a lack of data. So this is the type of fake news this is the type of false information we see all the time, where people take something that has a grain of truth in it and twist it into something that's just not true.
So how do you actually find out what's the tip that a person can use when they're actually trying to verify this information?
Well, Google is often your friend in this regard. So if you see something that looks shocking, or looks like it could possibly be suspicious, or looks possibly sensational, the first thing you can do is you can Google to see if any reputable organizations have reported on the same thing, right? So when I Googled this, I could not find any evidence that any reputable organization had reported that Switzerland had banned the AstraZeneca vaccine for its citizens. What you can also do, what Google will also show you is, if there is any related news to Switzerland and the AstraZeneca vaccine in this case, what that news actually is. And that's how I found the statement that was released by the Swiss medical authority. Just by Googling Switzerland and AstraZeneca vaccine, I was able to find out that Swissmedic had issued this advisory. So just double check everything that you see. When it comes to medical information, check with medical sources like the WHO or the CDC, or in this case, see if you can find the Swiss Medical Authority, because these organizations do have websites that they update regularly, and see if they actually did say what they're claimed to have said.
So how long did you basically take to identify that this was actually a fake news story?
This one was fairly straightforward, because, like I said, everything was already online. So Swiss Medic had published their statement recently online. It was fairly easy for me to find it. So I'd say that maybe researching this took me about, 15, 20 minutes, but that was just, getting all the data so I could write this report. Finding out whether or not the story was true actually took me much less, because, like I said, it just took a simple Google search. And often fact-checking information is not a lengthy process. Usually you'll find your answer just by doing a good Google search and looking at reputable organizations.
So Naledi, what happens when you find that a story is incorrect, and what do you basically do afterwards? What does the organization do?
Well, we write a report quite similar to the one that I've written here. So I will write this up, we publish it, and we have a partnership with Facebook. They have partnered with third-party fact-checkers all over the world to go through their posts, and if they find any posts that contain false information, to write a report and basically report those posts for containing false information. So once we have written this up and we've reported on Facebook that this post contains false information, what the website then does is it reduces the circulation of this post so that less people see it. And anyone who interacted with the post that contains false information gets a notification saying that this post has been fact-checked and found to be incorrect, and they're given the option to look at the link with the full report that states exactly why that is.
So why would people want to just construe information like that? Does it even make sense? But why would people do this?
Well, what we find is that most of the time when people share false information, they're doing so in good faith. They think that the information they're seeing is genuine, and so they're concerned, and that's why they're sharing it. And the one thing that is worth remembering when it comes to false information is that oftentimes it is designed with the intent of getting a rise out of you. It's designed to make you upset or to make you angry or to make you worried. And once it makes you emotional, that's when you're more likely to share it. So we always advise that if you're seeing something on social media that is upsetting, you just take a moment and you do some research on your own, and you make sure that what you're seeing is correct, because oftentimes false information does sensationalize and distort what may be a story that contains elements of the truth.
With regards to monitoring of news and fake news and information that's coming in, Naledi, are you able to share with us your secrets or some tips for our viewers?
Well, we spend a lot of time monitoring social media. So, with our partnership with Facebook, we do have an interface that allows us to see which posts are viral, and we use those and we fact check those. But for the average person, just looking through social media, there's so much false information that's shared there. And also just looking at what politicians say, particularly in the official statements that they release, oftentimes some of the claims that they're making may not be correct. So just Googling posts before you share them is one way that you can monitor and eliminate the amount of false information that you share. But also just question things. When you see a statistic that's being shared by a news organization or by a celebrity that looks unrealistic or that doesn't look quite right, then just Google it for yourself, do your own research, and make sure that before you share that information, it actually is accurate.
Now, things are fast on WhatsApp. People are sending messages all the time to each other. How are we able to actually detect what is fake news and what is real? We at Africa Check actually do have a WhatsApp service called What's Crap on WhatsApp. You can find a number for that on our website at africacheck.org. And what we do is every week we fact check posts that we receive on WhatsApp.
So that's one way of making sure that the information that you're seeing on WhatsApp is accurate. But, again, if you are on WhatsApp and you get a post that hasn't been checked by us before, you can submit it to us. You can also just, follow some of the tips I've shared before. Just if it looks sensational, if it looks like it's not quite right, do your own research. Look for reputable sources. If it contains medical information, look for medical sources such as the WHO or the CDC or the FDA, and just make sure for yourself that what you're sharing is correct before you share it.
I can understand how it works because I actually had that experience once when I needed to verify certain information. So I actually appreciate Africa Check and the work you all are doing. I actually sent you a message, your organization, and they came back to me immediately. So this is a very good platform that we currently have in the country. So we're going to come back to you in a moment. I want to discuss this a bit more further just after a short break. Welcome back and thank you for joining us. Joining me in conversation via Zoom is Naledi Mashishi, researcher at Africa Check. Naledi, can you tell us more about other cases where you found that it was actually fake news instead of fact?
Absolutely. So there's a fact check that a colleague of mine did that was on a claim that we saw, an article that we saw circulating social media that claimed that Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, had said that 700,000 learners wrote grade 12 final exams, but only 120,000 learners passed. Here's another fact check that a colleague of mine did, that on an article that was circulating Facebook, which claimed that the Minister of Basic Education had said that of the 700,000 learners that wrote their grade 12 final exams, only 120,000 learners passed. So the reason I like to bring your attention to this one is because this article was being shared by a website called Opera News. We have seen a lot of articles coming from this website, and most of the articles that we see coming from this website have been false. So if you see, and this one was false. In fact, at the time that this article was published, the grade 12, the 2020 matric exams were still being marked, and the results are only set to be released on the 22nd of February. So if you see articles going around from this website, but any website that just, might look a bit dodgy or doesn't look quite right, then you need to check them. Because there are a lot of websites online that are circulating articles in order to get traffic, but those articles actually aren't true. So this was another one that we did recently. But I previously checked them before, and I found them claiming very strange things like Kelly Kumalo disappearing. So you need to just be very careful with the articles that you read online.
So is there anyone actually regulating the amount of posts being put online?
No, there isn't. The thing with the internet is that anyone can post anything, and with the rise of blogs in particular, anyone can make a blog and write whatever they want on it, which is why you need to, rather than relying on blogs and YouTube videos, you need to be relying on established, reputable media organizations for your information. I would just need to say that sometimes they don't get things wrong, but the fact-checking processes that they go through are a bit more rigorous than the ones that blogs can often go through. So in this case, you see a headline like this, and the first thing you should be doing is Googling this to see if other people have reported this, because with a story like this, if it isn't being reported, then chances are it's not actually true.
Naledi, a lot of us go online and we're looking for information, we're researching all the time in all different lifestyles, whether it's students or whether it's a journalist. Can you give us some sort of idea what we can look for if we find a website that doesn't actually have the correct information? It's not fiction, but yet it looks real. How will we know what's the difference?
There are a couple of telltale signs. One of them is the URL. So if the URL contains strange numbers or strange letters or strange symbols, that's usually the first sign that it's not a legitimate news site. What some fake news sites do is they will pretend to be a real site. But if you look in the URL, you'll see that it's not. So for example, a site might pretend that it's ENCA. But if you look on the website, it'll say the URL will be ENCA1 or ENCAZY.co.za. And that should give you an immediate indication that that is not the real ENCA. Another thing that's a typical telltale sign is the quality of the writing in the website. If the writing is riddled with grammar errors, is riddled with spelling errors, that is usually a sign that it's not a legitimate site, as legitimate news sites tend to have very strict editing standards. A third sign is what kind of stories are they reporting? If they're reporting stories that sound sensationalized and that sound off, then that's usually a sign that it's not correct. For example, I found a false news site that was reporting on stories like a mother and a daughter getting married in Cape Town. That just sounds completely sensationalized and off. And when I looked that story up, there was no evidence that had happened. In fact, it would not legally be allowed to happen. So things like that can give you a clue that what you're looking at may not be legitimate.
Are you able to share with us the websites that you know of that are actually shady?
The one episode that I know of is Opera News. That's the one I know for a fact. But I have seen some, with the ENCA example that I gave, I have seen a website that was posing as ENCA, but when you looked in the URL, it had like a 1 or a 2 in it. I can't remember the name of the website off the top of my head. But those are the ones that really come to mind.
So is Africa Check the only organization that's monitoring for fake news in the country?
Africa Check, as far as I'm aware, Africa Check is the only one that's specifically dedicated to fact-checking, but most media organizations do have a fact-checking element now. It's becoming more and more popular. I know, for example, that Times Live and EWN do have fact-checking sessions where they do pretty much the same thing that we do. But as far as I'm aware, we are the only ones in South Africa who are just fact-checking, and that's all we do.
You mentioned to me earlier there was another story that you found has been fake news. Can you share with us that information about that story?
Sure. This is this is another story related to the vaccines. Like I said, vaccines, we're seeing a lot of misinformation on vaccines specifically. So this one is on the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines. And this was a viral Facebook post which claimed that Pfizer and Moderna are not referring to their vaccines as vaccines. They're referring to them as biological agents and as operating systems designed to program humans, and that only governments are calling them vaccines. So this was done by a colleague of mine who found that this is completely not true. They found that Pfizer and Moderna have always referred to their vaccines as vaccines. Now, the reason why this is notable is because Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines, and mRNA is a new technology. So we've been seeing a lot of conspiracy theories around mRNA vaccines. We've been seeing a lot of theories that these vaccines will change your DNA, but that's just not true. And this post is one of them perpetuating that theory. What my colleague found was that Pfizer and Moderna have only ever described their vaccines as vaccines, and that they have compared their vaccines to coding systems, but that doesn't mean that they're calling them a computer operating system. They were just explaining how messenger vaccines work in a way that is accessible for people to understand. So, when it comes to things like mRNA vaccines, the reason we see so much misinformation around it is because people don't understand what it is. But there are a lot of explainers online. We at Africa Check have published fact sheets explaining exactly what mRNA vaccines are. So if you are on social media and you see a post claiming that mRNA vaccines will change your DNA, or they'll program you to do all sorts of things, then you can go onto our website, look at our explainer on the vaccines, and see for yourself, what it actually says.
Now, Lady, misinformation is very damaging, not only to people understanding what's happening around them, but also for companies out there. Do you think that these companies are actually approaching Africa Check or other organizations to try and find out who's behind sending this fake news?
In my experience, I don't know that companies will necessarily look for the specific people who started sharing the misinformation. But what I have found is that when I'm fact-checking a post, for example, I was fact-checking a post that claimed that Tastic had closed down production. The second I call Tastic and ask them if that's true, they're often very responsive. So companies are often proactive. Once they know that someone is spreading something often that's not true, they can be very proactive about correcting that, either by responding to us very quickly or by issuing a post on their official social media account saying, we're aware of this information going around and we want you to know that it's not true. So companies do try, but there's such a high volume of misinformation that it can often be difficult for them to catch.
Now, Lady, tell me, in terms of international news, do you all also monitor that constantly?
We tend to focus our monitoring on Africa, specifically South Africa, although we do have offices in Nigeria and Kenya and Senegal that monitor news there. But we will fact-check international news if it is being shared quite a lot in South Africa. So, for example, a lot of information around the US election was being shared on South African social media. So we did fact-check some of that. Or we will share it if it's something that's in everyone's interest. So if it's information around health, particularly with COVID-19, regardless of where that comes from, we'll fact check it. If it's around a hot button issue like race, then we might fact check it as well, especially because racial issues tend to gain quite a lot of traction in South Africa as well. So we do have standards. I mean, we're not just going to fact check any random international news that we come across. It does need to either have a presence in South Africa or it needs to be a topic that's relevant to everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Naledi, for your time. Joining me up next is William Bird from the Media Monitoring Africa. Welcome back, and joining me now is William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. Welcome, William.
Hi, thanks for having me on the program.
William, in times of uncertainty, people need a good journalism that they can trust. And as Media Monitoring Africa, could you give us some practical ideas on how we could look at information now more seriously?
So I think that what we've seen over the COVID crisis has been how it has highlighted some of the big gaps in our media. We've seen real threats to media sustainability, but we've also seen how at a time of crisis, people really do rely and need credible media and to provide them with accurate, reliable information. And so the reason that our media have become that much more important now is that we've, at the same time as all of this explosion of digital media, we've seen an explosion of mis and disinformation. And so it's very easy to mislead, either intentionally or otherwise, members of the public about what's going on. It's very easy to make something look real and credible on digital media these days and fool people into thinking something disastrous has happened or something bad is happening. When that necessarily isn't the case. So the need for media to be especially credible, the need for us to have credible, diverse media now is certainly, I would think, greater than it has been at any other time, in fact, in our history, particularly because of this crisis that we're facing now and because of the rise of disinformation. Because in as much as there are tools and things that we'll get into about how to combat disinformation, one of the most effective tools against it is making sure that you've got credible media.
So what are those practical tools that you were mentioning that we could use?
So I think some of the things are for people to just get a sense of knowing their media. So the first thing to do is to know where you're getting your news and information from. If it's via WhatsApp, quite a number of our news organizations these days have their own specific WhatsApp number. If it's online, make sure that you know the URL of the news organization. Listen to diverse radio stations and take in different kind of community programs and TV channels. So it's knowing and understanding who they are and knowing what they stand for and what they're about. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you are unsure about content, there's lots of ways now you can check it. So you can download an extension called Know News, which is KNOW NEWS, either on your Firefox or your Chrome browser. And what that'll do is it'll run through a list. And if you go visiting a site for news and information that isn't credible, it'll alert you and warn you of that. And then one of the other key things is that you should just be generally skeptical of content that you receive, particularly social media channels, WhatsApp, etc. If that content makes you feel incredibly anxious, incredibly angry, or fearful. One of the key tools that people that spread mis and disinformation use is to make sure that they put you in a state of high emotion so that you avoid and ignore the logical problems with their particular arguments. So that is why they will make certain claims about the diseases and say that they are, that they've got a microchip in them, so that you'll be, oh my goodness, a vaccine's so outrageous, it's got a microchip in it. Or it's made from dead babies, and you'll be going, oh my goodness, how could they make something like that from dead babies? That's outrageous. And in doing that and in creating that level of anxiety, they make sure that you then ignore the fact that you go, hold on a minute. How on earth would reputable companies and our government possibly allow a pharmaceutical company to be making things from harvested dead fetuses? I mean, that's just crazy, right? So the moment you start to think carefully about that content, that's when you start to give yourself a bit of a better chance about fighting mis and disinformation. So it's to be skeptical of the kind of content you receive. It's to question if it's making you very emotional, either very angry, anxious, or fearful. That's also probably a sign. And also, if there's no way of tracking who it is that said this, often they'll say things like, this doctor or Dr. So-and-so. Google them, find out who they are, check if they're quoted in other media. If they aren't, chances are the person's probably not a real doctor at all, and they're just, making things up. So some of those are quite practical ways of combating it.
And Jamie, in terms of media monitoring Africa, I've noticed that some journalists wrote something and then afterwards retracted that information. How do you all handle such situations?
So I think that part and parcel of doing journalism is occasionally getting things wrong, and that's why we have things like the Press Council or the Broadcast Complaints Commission of South Africa, etc. So that if things do go wrong, and they do, you can get some form of speedy redress, and you can try and ameliorate the harm that has been caused. So the reason these things matter a great deal is that if your journalism and your journalists, the ones that you're relying on for credible and accurate information, if they start to give you things that aren't true, that are made up, that may even be lies, if they start to put that out and you believe it, then you may well put yourself in harm's way because you're believing something that isn't true. The moment you then discover that it isn't true, you then think, well, if FERMIDA told me this yesterday and it's a lie, why would I want to believe her today? In fact, why would I want to believe anything that we see from her? So it undermines your credibility, and it undermines the credibility of the channel. So in the instance you referred to about Jacques Poe, what he did was effectively seemingly make up some facts, in inverted commas, about wrongful arrest and all manner of other things. Now, he's a respected investigative reporter. So when he says things about issues like police brutality, you are inclined to believe them. So to then discover that in fact those things aren't true, it's effectively destroyed his credibility, and it's also deeply impacted the credibility of the news organization that article first appeared on. So credibility for journalists, getting things right, making sure that they take as many steps as practically and reasonably possible to make sure that they do get things right, matters a great deal. And it matters a lot more now precisely because there's so much mis and disinformation. So the pressure on our news media and our journalists is even greater now, actually.
William, can you tell me, is there anyone regulating this sort of information in the country? And is there going to be sort of like any repercussions for journalists going forward?
So for journalists particularly, there's a number of self-regulatory mechanisms and co-regulatory mechanisms. So usually a lot of media, particularly some of the bigger ones like the SABC, for example, they have their own editorial checks and balances and their own disciplinary processes and their own complaints processes. So if you lodge a complaint with the public broadcaster, for example, it can be regulated effectively by them internally. If you're not happy with that, you can then also go to the Broadcast Complaints Commission, for example, where your complaint will be heard. Where there's a big gap, of course, is around social media. And that's one of the reasons why, people are saying, well, how on earth do you try and regulate that? It's one of the reasons why we see governments in many nations taking a very harsh approach to trying to regulate social media. Very often they just shut the whole thing down. So there are a number of very big problems when it comes to dealing with how you regulate social media. So in South Africa, fortunately, we're not going down that path. At least we're not seeing any signs of that yet. And in fact, what we do have is a platform called Real 411 that enables members of the public to lodge a complaint about contents that they see on a digital media platform. So that content, you do have an avenue and a form of recourse. In terms of what will happen to Jacques Poe, well, we know he's already been fired as a contributor to the Daily Maverick. I'm pretty sure that very few news organizations would be willing to run any of his stories for some time. So, he's going to suffer very real consequences for this. He's, if he's relying on income as a journalist, that's going to dry up very, very quickly, I would imagine. So there are those direct consequences. And of course, there's the immediate consequence to his reputation and to the other media involved.
And as a media monitor, what have you been finding in terms of the trends? How have journalists been doing so far, let's say in the past 2 years since COVID began?
So when we look at COVID, I guess there are a number of things, because of course, when it's like the media as a whole, there are some excellent ones and there's some excellent reporters. There are journalists that we've got that are on a par with the best journalists anywhere in the world, where they write stories that are clear, that are incisive, that offer perspective, that offer context. We really do have some incredible journalists in South Africa. And again, you find journalists, as you do in every profession, who are lazy, they don't want to put in the effort, they don't want to do the work, and they will do a rubbish job. Often they may parrot, mis or disinformation that comes from politicians, or they think that writing a story is just listening to whatever a politician says. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but what we do need to be looking at is ways that we can ensure that journalists are as skilled as possible, and that they're making the right kind of ethical decisions, because the journalism sector itself is under profound threat from a sustainability perspective, from threats from governments, etc., around the world. So we need to make sure that we start to support and see and encourage people to see journalism as a public good.
Okay, I want you to hold that thought. We'll be back with you in the next few minutes. Welcome back. Joining me is William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. William, you had some ideas on how to inform the viewers and some tips on where they can go to actually lodge a complaint should they hear or see anything that looks like fake news.
Yeah. So thanks, FERMIDA. So one of the things they can do is if they just, and I'm going to just share my screen, is if they go to this site here, which is real411.org, they can see the site that will give them the information they need to learn about mis and disinformation and some of the other digital evils. And so what this site is effectively, it's a complaint site, and you can do a number of things. So the first is you can submit a complaint. And the basis on which you can submit a complaint is that we allow, so you fill in your name and your email, and don't worry, we don't send spam, we just send information to keep you updated on your complaint. Is you can report it on the basis of these 4 digital evils that we call them, or digital harms, if you like, which is either you're reporting on mis or disinformation, you may be reporting on hate speech, or you may be reporting on incitement to violence, or it might be about harassment of journalists online. So these are the things that we see quite commonly. And if you do that, you report an example of disinformation. You're asked to fill in some details, and then we keep you updated as to how your complaint is going. And if you want to, you can then go and have a look at some of the other complaints that are there. So these current ones are ones that are being assessed by the Secretariat. So let's just find one that's been resolved. Let's just go down to here. And what you can see from these is this one, for example. This is a complaint that someone submitted that says you can get 600 Rand in order to, if you go to a certain address. And what this is actually is not getting 600 Rand. This is clearly a phishing scam. So you can see that there are a number of ways in which people are putting out information. So you can view this in some detail. You can, if you've received this, you can then share it with your friends. So if you go and you click view complaint, you'll then be able to see more. So it's very similar in many respects to the kind of thing that some of our other regulatory bodies are doing. So you can see this is we offer a background to it, we offer a description of it, there's a fake, and then you can share this with your friends and family on social media if they get it, to help prevent the spread. And that's really what it's designed to do. If we find something like this, one of the things that we can do is write to the various social media platforms and ask them to take it down. The other thing you can do on the site is just have a look at some of the trends. And let's just take a month and a bit to see what the trends are, to give us a bit of a sense of what's been going on. And here you can see the level of complaints that have been reported on, and you can see that there's
a huge increase.
What days a week. And then you can also start to see that the most common platform for complaints is coming in this period are in fact mis and disinformation from WhatsApp. So what the site does is it attempts to give people a bit more insight into what mis and disinformation looks like at the moment in South Africa, what the complaints are about, and how they feature. So I would strongly encourage people to use the site, to report on it. It does have impact. That if you ask the platforms to take things down, they do. And if you want to, there's also an app that you can download so that it is available on your phone, which makes it a lot easier for you to lodge complaints. It's on the iStore and on the Google Play Store. And that's it in a nutshell. There's also some videos there that if you want to watch, you can see some of our celebrities who talk about mis and disinformation.
So basically what we're saying is that as people get more onto online and using the internet more than norm, they need to be more proactive and monitor what they're actually receiving. Is that what we're basically saying?
Yes, so combating disinformation is up. It needs to fall on everyone to actually do something about. It's no longer a case of, well, government must sort this out or the platform must sort this out. The mis and disinformation is such an evil thing for any democratic state, or in fact, just generally. It's just such a destructive tendency and trend now that it's up to all of us. So if you, as a member of the public, you need to act to help prevent it. The government needs to act in their ways that are legitimate and don't undermine freedom of expression to help protect it. They need to communicate it. And of course, our media need to report on it. They need to give us balanced, accurate, and fair information. And the platforms themselves, well, obviously, they have a key role to play in helping to remove it and identify networks that are spreading this kind of thing.
You're very right. Thanks, William, for your time today. I'm sure we'll catch up with you when you have other information to share with us.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be on your program.
Thank you for joining us. As you heard today, we had two guests, Naledi and William, who explained to us how to detect fact from fiction, or more commonly known as fake news. So the responsibility lies with us. What we receive before we send it out, we should actually check it up. And we've received some valuable tips today. So hopefully, I'd like to hear your feedback. If you can phone the office, or you can send me a WhatsApp on 074-887-7861, 074-887-7861.